Hello and welcome. This is the part number 10 of MUI series. In today's episode, I will show you how to use data grid component, which is basically a table in a grid-like format of rows and columns, which will help you to organize your data. In today's video, we will fetch users using free API and populate it in the MUI data grid component. We're going to need some extra dependencies for that component, so go to mui.com/components/datagrid/getting started and copy the MUI/x data grid as well as the MUI/material line, and then install them both in your project using npm or yarn commands. The next thing that we're going to do is to create a folder for our data grid component, and the whole thing is going to be reusable. In this video, we will fetch data from the API, but you could reuse it to display different type of data for your needs. So inside of the components common, we're gonna create a folder named data table. And this is where we're going to import MUI data grid, and then we can call it in our storage page. So in the command, type in data table, and inside of that folder, we're gonna create a file with the same name. So create a new file, datatable.js, and inside of it, type in array_fce. And then we can copy the data grid import line from the MUI website and use some sample code to see what the data grid actually looks like. The code examples from MUI website are written using TypeScript, and as this video is not covering the subject, I'll just convert the code back to the default format. But if you are familiar with TypeScript, then you can keep it as it is. There are two props that are necessary to run the data table or data grid. These are the rows and columns, and without it, the component will break. So with the copied rows and columns example, we're just gonna paste it back to our component and format it back to the default format. So we're just gonna get rid of the types. Now there is a relation between rows and columns. In columns, fields value is linked to rows keys. So you can clearly see that column value is col1 or col2, and in the rows we have them as keys. So column 1 or col2 are holding some values. And more about it later once we get to fetching the data from the API. Now we can go back to our storage page and get rid of the code from the previous video where I've left some stuff that we've been playing around with, and this is no longer needed, so it can be deleted. And this is where I'm gonna call the data table component, and I'm just gonna save it and see if it's working. Okay, cool. So the table is being rendered with the sample columns and rows. Obviously the styles are a bit off, but I will look into that later. The header section for each column is clickable, and there are sorting and filtering options that are coming in as default, which is really cool. And you can also hide and show columns. As you can see, right now I'm trying to search by using the value, and only the row with matching value appears. Okay, I guess playing around parts I can leave for you guys so we can get back to coding, and within the next step I'm going to reuse the data table. So in that unique reused component, we are going to display the user data only. In order to get that working, we need to send rows and columns as a prop. So later we can define that in our user table component. So let's go to the datatable.js, and we're going to get rid of the rows and columns, and inside of the props we're just going to pass rows and columns. Then we can hit save, and then inside of the components we're going to create another folder which we're going to call user table, and inside of it we're going to add a file with the same name, and obviously inside of it we're just going to add in array_fce, so you can create a functional component real quick. I'm just going to do a quick indent cleanup. Afterwards we will import data table component and call it inside of the return function, and get rows and columns from the API call. In two previous videos we've created loading component and snack bar alert. I was hoping that we can reuse both, but it turns out that the loading logics are already attached inside of the data grid, and unfortunately I wasn't aware of that. For this video, we will only reuse the snack bar component, so the error snack bar would pop up when fetching the data isn't successful. Right now I'm just going to copy and paste the rows and columns again to have a starting point for the user table component. And we would like to call the user table inside of the storage page, so we can get rid of the data table component and replace it with the user table. Once this is saved, we can check our browser and see if it's working. Okay, it looks fine. In the next step, we will start writing the logics to fetch the user data, and we're going to use the free fake API from jasonplaceholder.typicode.com. The fetching logics are already on the website, so you can just copy the code example. The only thing that we would need to do for now is just add it inside of the user effect. So go to the user table and we're going to create a user effect. And inside of it, we're just gonna paste the code from the placeholder website. The URL from the code example isn't the correct one, so we're just gonna replace it in a second. I'm just gonna create some indents. And then instead of the to-dos, we're just gonna use the users. And this is what the data object looks like. There's quite a lot of data in each object, and I guess we can use name, username, and maybe some contact details. In that fake API call, we have 10 users only, and it isn't a lot, but it should be enough for learning purposes. So I'm just gonna go back to the code editor and replace to-dos URL with the users. And then we can check in our application if the data is actually coming through. So open up console, and as you can see, there's an array with 10 objects inside. Now we can get rid of the sample columns and rows and write up the code that will reflect what columns and rows we want to display. Also, we should store the user data somewhere. Right now it's just being logged in the console. And for that, we need to create a state, which I'm going to call users and set users. So right underneath the user table, add in const users, set users equals to use state. And as it is an array, we would like to add an empty array as a default state. And obviously, we need to import the use state from React. Then we need to set the users, so they won't be console logged anymore. So we just need to replace the console log part with the set users. Okay, so now we store the data in the user's state, and we need to handle the way of displaying data object using rows and columns props. If we just adjust columns array and change first object field value to ID and header name to user ID, and then in return we're going to replace rows with users, then we should be able to display IDs of each user. Let's hit save and see what's going to happen. And as you can see, only the ID of each user from the fetched data is appearing, and what we can do now is basically the same for other elements. I'm just going to duplicate columns object so I can render maybe name, username and email, but feel free to use other keys if you wish to. And for this particular example, I'm not going to overcomplicate it, and we'll just grab these 4 values. So as you can see, I'm just replacing field value with keys from the users array, and within the header name, I'm just adding the name that I wish to display. Okay, with the changes made, I'm able to display my users array within the data grid. You can use built-in filtering options. You can even hide columns to help you with organizing data. And now we've got our data table loading the data or loading the users array. And I think it's time to customize our component a bit. Let's open up the DataGrid API page, and this is where all the props for this component can be found. It has a lot of options. There are two fundamental ones that you need to provide, and these are columns and rows, and if they're not being called, then your component will break. As we're making a network call to grab the data, we need to think of two scenarios. The first one is the error. Let's say we're trying to fetch users, but the server is returning 500 error status. It will be good to handle that situation and let the user know that something's wrong. In this case, we would use the snackback component that we've created in one of the previous videos to display the error message. The second scenario is, let's say our network connection is really slow. At this moment, we do not let the user know what's happening. He doesn't know that the data is being loaded up in the background, so it would be good to handle loading state within the data grid. We're just going to start off with the loading state, and we need to go back to our root component where the data grid is being called. We want to add in loading equals to loading and pass it as a prop. Then in the user table, let's receive that prop. So loading equals to loading should be true when there are no users, and we got our user state that is being updated once the data is being fetched. So in the loading, we need to add exclamation mark users.length. So if there are no users, then loading is true, and if there are users, then loading is false. The fetch data is small and it should load very quickly, and we won't be able to see the toggle of the loading state. In that case, we need to mimic bad internet connection. To do that, just open up your console and then go to the network tab and adjust throttling to slow 3G. Once that's done, refresh the page and you will notice that the loading spinner is there on render, then it's been replaced with the data. Okay, the loading state is sorted. Next, we will customize the style slightly. We're going to add pagination, checkboxes, and buff the looks in general. Back to the storage.js page, we want to clear it up a bit. We don't have to mimic the loading state there anymore, so we can get rid of the unnecessary components as well as the use effect. And remember, we have a reusable basic card component, so we can use it to display the table in it. So I'm just going to call basic card, and it will automatically get imported. And then in we have content prop, and that content prop will render our user table. So content equals to user table, and we can get rid of the user table that we had previously. I guess for now the rest of the code can stay, and let's see how does the user table looks like in a browser. Okay, this is not correct. I guess we need to set the height of the table, and to do that we need to override the styles, and we are going to do that by using the SX props. So back in the data table component, add in SX equals to SX and pass it as a prop, and then in the user table, add in SX equals to say user table styles. Then outside from our component, we're going to add const user table styles and open up curly brackets, and using JSS we're going to define the height. And if you're not familiar with setting these styles using SX props, you can look at the video number 3 where I talked about overriding MUI styles. Okay, I think I'm gonna increase the height slightly. Say 1000, no, 1000 is too much. 650 perhaps. Okay, that works. Let's make our rows selectable. So we need to go back to the DataGrid API page and look for the checkbox selection prop. And I'm not going to pass it to user table. I'm just going to set it to true in the root component. Okay, so in the data table, add in checkbox selection, and then all our rows are selectable using the checkbox component. Okay, next we going to set the pagination, and it might look a bit funny as we only have 10 records, but we'll do it only for the learning purposes. Now we need to go back to the data grid API page, and we want to grab two props, page size, which sets the number of rows in the page. By default it is being set to 100. And for the page size, we're just gonna copy and paste it to our root component. We're not gonna pass it as a prop. And I guess I'm gonna set it to 2 actually. And then we would like to update the rows per page options prop. And that takes an array of numbers, and that prop selects the page size dynamically using component UI. And in our case, we're just gonna set it to 2, 5, and 10, which means we will have the possibility to display 2, 5, or 10 rows at the same time. And actually, as you can see, it's not updating our data table, and we need to use a callback prop and update the state of the page size. So we're gonna add pagination prop, and also the page size will equal to page size. And for that, we will have to import the use state. So make sure at the top right to the React, you're going to import the use state. And then we want to add a prop that returns a callback function. And that prop is called on page size change. And we're going to use the arrow function. And we're just going to pass new page size. And then as a return, we're going to set page size, new page size, which in short will mean that on every page size change, it will set the new page size. The only thing that we're missing is defining the state. So we're going to add const page size set page size, and that equals to use state, and perhaps 2 as a default state. And now in the browser, as you can see, now it updates the page size every time you interact with the row options. And the next thing, we're going to link the snack bar to display error message if something's wrong with fetching the data. In our user table, precisely in the use effect, we would like to catch the error, and to do that we need to add a catch method, and we would like to add a callback so we can pass it to the storage component. So .catch arrow function, and the callback we can call, maybe it's gonna be better if we call it on error. And inside of the prop section, we're gonna add on error. Then we can go back to the storage component and define on error, which can be updated in a second. And in here, we can also import the basic snack bar component, which has been created in part number 8 of the series. You can also access the code for every single part of the series from my GitHub repo that's linked up in the video description. So in the snack bar, I'm just going to set the props for it. So open equals to open, severity equals to error, which is a string, and the message will be hard-coded. Data couldn't be fetched. You can also get the message from the on error callback, but I'm just going to keep it simple for this example. So as you can see in the snack bar, we're using the open state to show or hide the snack bar, which means within the on error callback, we want to set open to true to show the snack bar. That way, every time the error happens, we trigger the set open state and we set it to true, and the snack bar will appear for, I think, 5 seconds. We can also reuse the function that we created previously to make sure the snack bar is closed on a click away. In order to do that, we need to use onClose prop and link it to the handle close. So in the basic snack bar, add onClose equals to handle close, and that way our snack bar will automatically close on click away. Now we need to check if our logics are working. Ideally, we should mimic some broken network calls. In order to do that, we need to go back to our browser, and in the console, we need to set the throttling back to slow 3G. then refresh the page, and once the page is refreshing, quickly change the throttling to offline. So let's do that. So it's slow 3G. I'm gonna refresh it, then quickly change to offline. And as you can see, our snack bar message pops up and our logics are working for corrupted API calls. Okay, I think I can call it a day. In this video, you have learned how to fetch the data from the API call, created reusable table component using MUI data grid, populated fetched data within that data grid, and how to customize it by adding loading state, error notification system, adjusting pagination options. Thank you for watching and see you soon.